When you are in Trafalgar Square, you are surrounded by monuments which exemplify the notion of Englishness. With its huge lion sculptures and historical monuments, Trafalgar Square seems to be all about representing Britain as a powerful, independent and strong nation. Tourists involve themselves in rituals and routines such as throwing coins into the four fountains and climbing onto the lions for photographs. Predominantly tourists in Trafalgar Square appear to be the only ones taking photographs and, it could be suggested, the only ones appreciating such a historical and important area in London. To tourists unaware of the historical meanings behind sculptures such as Nelson's Column, there are few signs for visitors explaining who the sculptures are of and what they did. Nonetheless, tourists take photographs regardless of whether they understand the significance of the monuments. It seems that photographs with monuments such as the lions are as much a piece of holiday memorabilia as are the Union Jacks sold at stalls across the city. There are several "Do not feed the pigeons" signs in lots of different languages, which suggest that people do in fact feed the pigeons. Most of Londoners probably wouldn't feed the pigeons, and this shows the tourist nature of Trafalgar Square and how the idea of pigeons in Trafalgar Square is a novelty London experience for tourists and an everyday occurrence for normal Londoners. From observing the behaviour of tourists, it is noted that people rarely take photos of the four plinths at either corner of the square.
The stats show Trafalgar Square is obviously space primarily used by tourists. This assumption can be made by comparing the figures to the appearance of icons connoting tourism. Maps could be found 5 times more than on other observed objects. Families using buggies up to twice as often, and only here we found school groups on excursion. Compared to uncountable users exploring the space, taking pictures and following tour guides, Londoners in rather conservative outfit could be summed up into 15 men and 5 women, who, walking across the square, obviously straight to their destination without interacting with the space, allows the assumption that citizens avoid this.
Graphic attractions are the 4 huge lions surrounding Nelson's Column. A few people can be seen standing by the National Gallery taking photos of Nelson's Column, but the most exciting feature to tourists appears to be the lions. This appears to be a novelty of London as a tourist destination. Trafalgar Square is not ignored by Londoners, but appears to be a central point in the city to have a break and relax. You would imagine that the cafe in Trafalgar Square would attract many tourists. Perhaps it was the time of day we were there or the day itself, but virtually all of the people sitting outside the cafe appeared to be Londoners or businessmen having a coffee and reading a newspaper in their lunch break.
London's most important governmental organs are here. Whitehall, with Scotland Yard on one side and Parliament Square on the other, passing the Ministry of Defence and number 10 Downing Street, represents the governmental administrative of the city. Naturally, many people working in those buildings walk along Whitehall, emphasizing in the opposite a distinctive image of the tourist. The latter appear significantly different when gathering around the cenotaph or speaking to the horse guards. The numbers show that a high representation of authority can be observed here. While on Trafalgar Square only 2 uniformed members could be defined, 1 police guard and 1 security guard of the National Gallery, 9 uniformed people represented the military, the Prime Minister's personal security, and the Queen's executive force on Whitehall. Yet, next to the national representation of authority and history, in form of memorials and colonial heritage, tourism can be found frequently. The Queen's Horse Guard, for example, can be purchased and preserved at home as a little door from the souvenir shop. Native and foreigners appear on this stage merely ignoring each other. While citizens are on the move following their route, tourists work off one attraction after the other, abolishing governmental functions.
The cenotaph, constructed in 1919, commemorates those who died specifically in the First World War. It's since been extended to commemorate the victims of all wars in which British servicemen have fought. Reviews on TripAdvisor have ranked it in the bottom 15% of London's tourist attractions. Apart from Remembrance Sunday, the cenotaph is not very well marked. It is perhaps better known nationally to tourists from other parts of the UK than to international tourists. People passing it on Whitehall seem to pay it very little attention. The Women in World War II memorial block away drew more attention. Yet, it is still important to note that by benefit of its placement in Whitehall, in the center of the street, anyone traveling through the area as a tourist, as a resident, on foot or by car, must observe it. Kipling chose the phrase "the glorious dead" for inscription, and with that choice and its position next to the seat of political power of Whitehall, the UK again seems to glorify in war and its empire. Perhaps not the heroism of those that served, but rather the martyrdom of those that died.
Walking through this park, it is evident that there is more in its background than simply the modern romantic environment. Its background being the oldest royal park gives it a reminiscing tone and nature of a different era. Surrounded by Westminster Palace, which has now become the Houses of Parliament, St James Palace and Buckingham Palace, it has a pivotal role as a middle space for both the people, represented by the Parliament, and the sovereign. The park, as it stands now, is as John Nash redesigned it, which is a more romantic style with a natural-looking lake, the various kinds of birds, and the bird-keeper cottage, and the bridge of the lake. Traditionally, it has been the place where both the sovereign and the subjects would mingle, as Charles II did, and maybe even today, in a more metaphorical way, still stands in this purpose.
There is a new group to be observed in St James Park. Couples appearing 3 times here were not significantly in any other observed space. Also, besides families and joggers, the way citizens use this space dedicates the park as leisure space. Members of the group that former was walking in a fast pace are now strolling, talking on the phone or to others, and mostly in groups of 2 or 3 rather than alone.
Traversing the park to pass to either Whitehall and Trafalgar Square on the one side, or Buckingham Palace and Green Park on the other. Generally, the vast majority of people could be said to be English. It may be mentioned that it can be seen as a more grown-up place. The relaxing nature of the park, being of prime central location and yet offering a peaceful and serene environment, is evident in the manner people talk in the park, the ways in which they use the park and stroll and wander around, or even as a place to have a quiet lunch break from a rather hectic city centre. It is a place of retreat from the city, and even though there is not much to see, it offers a beautiful environment where people can simply enjoy a break. Walking from the Horse Guards towards Buckingham Palace, the palace itself slowly presents behind a series of trees and can be viewed from a vantage point when crossing the bridge of the park, which is of the lake. The whole experience may be characterised as a very London experience, though itself being a garden, it gives out the romanticism of it and how that may correlate to nationalism and ideas of national identity. For this, people in England may be viewed as a nation of prosperity, where the English people have the leisure to spend time in parks as part of their everyday life. A fact, however, which does not stand realistically in modern English culture, where everyone is driven by the incentive that time is money.
The Mall is a central road in London that goes from Buckingham Palace to Admiralty Arch and then to Trafalgar Square. When we visited the Mall, it wasn't as impressive as I initially had thought. There were no flags or any ceremonial symbols indicating the importance of the road. It is quite large, but that was really the only impressive aspect of it. It definitely didn't seem like a big tourist attraction, and the only tourists on the road were not actually observing or taking pictures, but were just walking through to get somewhere more important. I feel like it would be a road aimed more at locals, since it gains importance during specific events that tourists are most probably unaware of. Apart from those days when there are special ceremonies, for the rest of the year the Mall is just an ordinary road.
It is interesting comparing Buckingham Palace to somewhere like Whitehall, as it accentuates the touristic value of the palace in contrast to the functional governmental buildings. Tourists flock to see the palace, but it seems to be somewhat disappointing, as it provides no spectacle or display, only the guards and the closed gates. The tourists, although happy to snap pictures and ogle at the palace, seem somewhat lost and unsure of what to do considering the hype surrounding such an attraction. Perhaps it has developed from a functional palace where balls and conferences were held, to a tourist attraction to which people go in order to say they have been there. The surprising lack of security also serves to emphasize the fact that Buckingham Palace is no longer a central point of importance,
but has developed into something more nostalgic, the remnants of a time when the monarchy was all-powerful, perhaps even more meaningful to tourists than to the locals, as it represents a certain sense of Englishness, which they seek out when travelling to London. The decorative palace seems to be more of a symbolic emblem of what used to be, signifying and upholding English history.